William Douglas, 2nd Earl of Angus. William Douglas, 2nd Earl of Angus, 24 February 1398 October 1437, was a Scottish nobleman and soldier. The son of George Douglas, 1st Earl of Angus, and Princess Mary of Scotland, he was a grandson of King Robert Roman III. The story of Angus' life is interwoven with that of his uncle and King James I of Scotland. Angus was born about 1398 at Tantallon Castle in East Lothian. He inherited the Earldom of Angus in 1402 following his father's death of the plague whilst in English captivity following the Battle of Homildon Hill. Return of King James. In 1420, Angus was nominated as one of 21 noblemen to be delivered as hostages to the English court as security for the ransom of King James I. James had been captured by the English in 1406 and was held by first Henry Roman IV of England and latterly by his son Henry V of England. During the king's captivity, Scotland was ruled by his uncle Robert Stewart, Duke of Albany, who had been in no hurry to pay his nephew's ransom. Following the death of Albany in 1420, the Scots finally paid the ransom moneys owed. Whatever the machinations that followed, Angus was not included on the final list of hostages, but was one of the body of Scots nobles who met their king at term in 1424. The king was escorted triumphantly back to Scotland, and Angus received a knighthood from the king at his coronation at Scone Abbey on the 2 June of that year. Royal Gaoler. In 1425, a purge took place of the Albany Stuarts and their adherents. The trial which followed at Tantallon Castle included Angus amongst a large faction of Douglas nobles within the jury. Facing execution were Murdoch Stewart, 2nd Duke of Albany, his two sons Leicester and Walter, and the Earl of Lennox. The widowed Duchess of Albany was held a close prisoner at Tantallon under the supervision of Angus for 8 years. In 1429, King James went north to deal with the ever-troublesome Lord of the Isles, Alexander of Islay, Earl of Ross. This in response to Alexander and his Islemen's burning of Inverness. Angus was a captain in the royal army, and when Islay finally submitted to the king at Holyrood Abbey, he was entrusted to the keeping of Angus at Tantallon for 2 years. Warden of the Marches. In 1430, Angus was sent on embassy to England as one of the commissioners to negotiate an extension of the truce with the newly crowned Henry VI of England, which was prolonged for 5 years. Later in that year, he was appointed Warden of the Middlemarch. In 1435, Angus led a troop of men to invest Dunbar Castle. The castellan, George Roman II, Earl of March, had previously been made a ward of the king, and the garrison surrendered the castle bloodlessly. Dunbar Castle was then held of the king by Angus and Sir Adam Hepburn of Hales. Dunbar fled to England, calling for help in regaining Dunbar Castle by force of arms. This help materialized in the spring of 1435 when Sir Robert Ogle, the governor of Berwick-upon-Tweed, with Henry Percy and 4,000 men marched north to retake the castle. Angus, with Hepburn and Alexander Ramsay of Dalhousie, decided not to undergo a siege and engaged with the English forces at the Battle of Piperdean, near to Cockburnspath. This encounter resulted in defeat for the English, but with little loss of life. 1,500 prisoners were taken and ransomed. Later life. Angus continued to consolidate his estates, often at the expense of his cousins the Black Douglases, taking positions in fortresses previously held by the Earls of Douglas, such as Lintilly and finally Hermitage Castle for a time. Following the assassination of his uncle King James in February 1437, Angus was instrumental in the pursuit and capture of the conspirators. These included Walter Stewart, Earl of Athol, a great-uncle of Angus himself. Angus died in October of the same year, aged 39. Marriage and issue. Angus' mother remarried in 1409 to Sir James Kennedy, younger of Dunure. It is thought that around this time that Angus was betrothed through negotiations by his grandmother, Margaret Stewart, 4th Countess of Angus, to Margaret Hay, daughter of Sir William Hay of Leicester. They married in 1425 and they had 5 children: James Douglas, 3rd Earl of Angus, George Douglas, 4th Earl of Angus, William Douglas of Cluny, Hugh Douglas, Rector of St Andrews, Helen Douglas, Meters. First, William II, Lord Graham of Kincardine, Graham 2nd. James Ogilvy, 1st Lord Ogilvy of Ailey. Latterly, Angus' sister, Lady Elizabeth Douglas, would marry his brother-in-law, Sir David Hay of Leicester. Through their son John Hay, 1st Lord Hay of Leicester, they are the ancestors of the Marquesses of Tweeddale.